on a daily basis, I don't think a lot of us have access to architectural monuments, but we move from home, maybe to the office, grocery store, the library. As individuals who use these spaces on a daily basis, how should we experience them? Don?
I think that there is, your question is really about the kind of fabric of building that makes up much of our daily encounters, live, work, play. And I think as you encounter buildings, I think the buildings have an obligation, and the architects who design them have an obligation to make them welcoming, to make them accessible, to make them visible and clear in terms of how you access them, have an obligation to think about how they're clad, because it's not simply enclosing space. We now know how to make buildings that generate electricity, that mini power plants that can, we've done 2 major academic buildings now in Canada that the skin of the building generates 1/4 of the energy, the exterior skin, 1/4 of the energy consumed by the building on an operational basis. So how does the skin, how is it responsible for those who are experiencing those spaces every day? When you enter the building, what makes us feel safe and comfortable and welcome? It's if there's a clarity of how we orient ourselves in the building, to what extent our interiors kind of biophilic, how can they be regenerative, as was mentioned earlier? To what extent do you locate yourself in space and find your way through very large office and community buildings and commercial buildings that we build? How do you navigate those spaces? What are the quality of warmth and welcome, and what's the quality of natural light in those spaces? What's the relationship of views to the exterior? All of those issues are things that really affect our sense of well-being as we move through the kind of built environment. And I think we have the obligation, to use that word again, that really makes the difference in terms of the value of that built environment.
But as architects of these large-scale projects, how do you experience those spaces? Eladia?
When I walk into a space and I hear a drum beat or music, I feel exhilarated. When I smell a smudge happening, I feel grounded and at home and immediately much more calm and like I belong there. And so a lot of the function of contemporary buildings has been to create a highly sanitized artificial environment that does not include a lot of the sensory experiences that might have been part of space, back in the day. And so I'd love to see us start to be a little bit more relaxed with how public space allows activities that may not be part of our very sanitized expectation of what that space will be. So I think when we think about architecture and the experience of space, it has to include all of the senses. So the sense of the body in space, the sense of our relationships with each other and how we can interact, how that space defines how we're allowed and encouraged to interact, and the types of activities that we can do in that space, that we're allowed to do. Because the creation of space defines territory. It defines who owns that space and who makes the rules. And so that's why we've seen, I think in public space especially, a huge sanitization, a series of rules where you're only allowed to do certain things and all other things are excluded. So if we want to express the amazing and beautiful diversity of the Canadian experience, we have to start opening up the door to that in our spaces.
Well, Marianne, how do you experience those spaces as an architect?
Well, I think you are a body in space, and I think you have a proprioception. You sense what the space is. And so, Frank Lloyd Wright talked about compression. He was a small man, but it came in compression and expansion. And so you're looking for how your body responds And I think it is all the senses. I particularly am interested in the sense of touch, that you actually can touch materials, that you touch the handrail, you see, you feel your body in space, and you actually smell too. So interesting that you say, so in the concert hall, when you do a concert hall that's completely wood, it actually engages that sense of smell, and that's my partners laugh at me, but in fact, it is part. You can tell what's happening in a room from that as well. So it's a very broad engagement, but I think it's also, buildings have to be legible. You really need to find from the outside in and inside out. And I'm a big advocate of opening up doors to large terraces and beginning to let the inside out. And I think there are challenges to our mechanical systems of how we can slide walls and open up. So a terrace that might be a winter terrace, it might be outside in the winter, actually comes inside in the summer. And that sort of convertibility is a very important part of what, if we can actually not be running systems, but actually using natural ventilation, and just, taking a completely different take. So I think we do need to ask, it's a good question. People should think about how they do. I think people walk through spaces without that orientation, but every once in a while you get in a space where you say, aha, I see something very different.
I think it's also important to understand how spaces sound. There's one thing, of course, is performance spaces and what's the acoustic in those rooms. But just, we choose restaurants or we choose spaces that are not overwhelmingly noisy or not overwhelmingly quiet. Like there is the dimension of materiality and light and the kind of form and shape of space, but also the acoustic of rooms is something that is, again, not paid enough attention to.
We're going to come back to that, I'm pretty sure, because I really want to speak to you about some of your projects and get your insights on the ideas that went behind them. Carol, I want to start with you. You spoke about the use of timber, and we want you to take us through this design of George Brown College. You can see that there on the screen. That's the outside. And beginning from the outside, what kinds of things should I pay attention to when approaching this building?
Well, one of the things from the exterior that you'll see when you approach this building, and I want to say, we talked earlier about on another day about process, and our process now is highly collaborative. So we are working with another architect on this project out of Vancouver, Acton Austri Architects, but and a slew of incredible engineers. But one of the first things you should see when you see this building is that it has a material solidity to it. So many of our buildings down, especially down at the waterfront, are just glass. And there's a kind of unsettling thing about that. With glass, you see this duality. There's buildings reflecting other buildings. There's buildings that reflect two of you. There's this other world that's in the reflection of everything, and I think it kind of leads to a sense of placelessness. So when
a place of placelessness?
A sense of placelessness.
Oh.
So I think that when you have a building that has a material solidity, it asserts a place, it shows its form, it creates the space around it to be legible. It doesn't disappear. So I think as you approach that building from the exterior, the first thing you'll see is the form, and you'll see its presence, and it will be distinct from other buildings in that community at the waterfront because it does have more material presence. And you'll see that more and more because as we work towards architecture that is more sustainable, we cannot just clad all of our buildings in glass anymore. So it's a really fantastic opportunity to create those environments that actually speak to the material presence of a place.
I wanted to show the interior for a second. This is the concept design. You can see a lot of light inside. And another one, we've got another one. This is mid-construction. We have another picture. What about the use of light in this space?
So this is where, again, the active collaboration comes in, where we are no longer working with napkin sketches and asking our engineers to wrap it all in engineering. We're working very hand in hand and collaboratively with a whole slew of people who help to tell us more and more and more about the environments that we're building in. And so daylighting this building is a huge part of creating an environment where people feel connected to the city, connected to the lake. It's a teaching building. It's for George Brown College, and there are going to be teaching spaces all through the 10 stories. So natural light, understanding what time of day it is, understanding our relationship to the daylight in the building and not using artificial light for everything is actually part of the engineering. It's part of the energy savings of the building, but it's also going to actually connect people with their environment and the time of day, the context they're in, and that is actually part of what the major drivers are.
And it also creates that feeling, right?
It creates and it also helps us highlight the fact that we have a building that is going to be made out of this natural material, and the warmth and the play of light against that. And I think everybody knows that the play of light in buildings is actually part of the magic of good architecture, is that to understand how light grazes across a material, to understand how the daylight comes in and changes your understanding of the time of day, and understands us ourselves as natural creatures, our reaction to the passing of the day, and how we begin to change chemically as well when daylight comes in, when we're exposed to daylight. So daylight is a huge part of this design.
Dawn, I want to come to you next. I've got an image here of the National Arts Center in our nation's capital. I wanted to start from the outside, and your firm designed this. Can you explain the exterior of this project, please?
So this is a building that is connected to the original National Arts Center built about 55 years ago. And that was a building entirely clad in concrete and relatively opaque. So there's this extraordinary group of 500 creative people inside the building who were never seeing the light of day, literally, during but also for passerby and audiences, a mystery about what was behind the walls of that concrete fortress. Our interest was to open up the life of the interior to the exterior, to kind of convey the excitement of what's happening inside artistically to the millions of tourists who are in Ottawa, particularly during the summer, to open up the building to the north, and it's north-facing glass, so we could have large amounts of glass without, solar impacts. And
so you have a what's your design philosophy when it comes to using glass?
I think it's really using glass in a kind of way that's appropriate to the task. In this case, we're trying to make new lobbies that are community crossroads that are used all day long. Those lobby spaces begin with
There's the
yoga
lobby right
in the
now?
morning.
The inside?
Yoga in the morning, people gathering all day long, obviously used as lobby spaces for the 4 performance spaces in the building in the evening. And so using glass as a way of revealing this, almost making a Japanese lantern that reveals it in the evening, but also makes it full of light and animation during the day, that opens to the views of the canal, of Parliament Hill, of the kind of great architecture of the Confederation Boulevard, the War Memorial, etc.
I want to bring the orchestra, Shell, because earlier on you spoke about the importance of sound in a space.
Right.
As you move through that building, is movement something you consider when designing that space, like how it feels when you move from space to space?
The movement and the sequence is of arrival and departure and being there during the day is enormously important. I mean, I don't know if you can pull back the view of the lobby space. It's a space that is made. The structure is wood. The original architecture of that building was inspired by the work of Alexander Graham Bell, and specifically the kites that he was exploring, tetrahedral geometric configurations in developing flight. The original Fred Levensold, the architect of the previous iteration of the National Arts Center, was inspired by Bell as a Canadian inventor, inspired by the geometries. Those geometries informed how the original building was made, and that informed how we made the wood structure, these deep coffers, all wood, that is the structure, all prefabricated, off-site, low-tech, simple, brought to site and clip together so we could create 80,000 square feet of space in 7 weeks.
Wow.
And use that sort of natural material, Canadian material, as a counterpoint to the concrete of the existing. And the movement of that through that space is into, for example, Southam Hall that you had the image of, extending the use of wood in reshaping the acoustic of that room, in reshaping the accessibility of that room, of reshaping the quality of the performance, really focused on an immersive relationship between performer and audience. Because I think, as we were saying a couple of days ago in this series, I think the opportunity for architecture is to intensify the relationship between people occupying the building and the users. So in the case of theater, that's an obvious interest in intensification that is represented in Southam Hall.
I never thought about it like that, like an immersive experience.
Musicians play better and audiences hear better if those physical relationships are spot on.
It's a better experience. Marianne, I wanted to come to you next. This is a project here in the provincial capital, the Royal Conservatory of Music's Kerner Hall, and that is the outside. What's really striking is how much of the older building is paired with a more modern feature. What was the process around designing this space?
But it's an interesting institution. The Royal Conservatory has been around for 160 years, and it's actually touched Canadians and anyone who's been part of the colonies. What child didn't take a Royal Conservatory piano level of instruction? So this was about program invention in a way. It was bringing performance to an institution that was all about learning or teaching piano, teaching music. And so the addition, this programmatic addition of a 1,000-seat hall, which the city had been asking for in many different sites, plus what's called the Temerty Theatre, the theatre that you see right on Bloor Street. So there was no site, really. We had to wrap this building, and it really is almost like housing, putting an elephant behind a very delicate piece of porcelain, which was the existing heritage building. And I think it brings up issues about how do we relate to our heritage context? How do we bring new pieces into the fabric without overwhelming the existing, but actually complementing and modernizing the whole institution?
How do you reach that balance?
The same process we were all talking about. A lot of research, thinking about program, thinking about the site, and about actually, talking to the people who will use these, and actually just trying to fit a 1,000-seat hall behind the heritage, the building.
I have another image here. This is the corridor behind the older building and the performance space. On the left, you have the older building, and on the right, you have the newer building.
So that's really, if you stay with that, that is really the aha space. That's the space between when you say, how do you get a social space? And the conservatory wanted a heart to their building. They wanted a place that people would gravitate to, and it would become the not only because there are students, babies in the morning with strollers, there are students, professional students during the day, and then there are performers at night and audiences. It's a 24/7 kind of operation.
There's also a lot of light, right? What about the use of light in that?
Light?
Yeah.
Well, we were able to naturally light that atrium space, that 2.5-story space. So we brought a lot of light in. And also I think, one of the things that when we talk about buildings, we talk about, you want orientation. When you want to know that orientation is towards Philosopher's Walk. It's not a piece of property that the conservatory owns. It's owned by the University of Toronto, but we connect to it. So this building implies a kind of city, implies a public realm. So we had, there were many, many challenges. I mean, the project took a long time, shall we say. Can't even remember how many years anymore.
We have another image, and this is the grand performance space.
Yeah.
What feeling do you want people to feel when they're in that space?
Well, I think when you walk in acoustically, it's quiet. It's more than quiet. You almost feel this sort of, you can feel your body change as though you were in a completely different atmosphere. So it's very quiet, but it does engage all the senses. If you touch the wood, it's been raked because the acoustician wanted texture. That wonderful smell of the wood is there. And then you hear, the sound in there is incredible. You can hear somebody whisper on the stage. And so that it is that engagement. And I think because we were so tight for sight, we are pressed onto the stage. So when a performer walks out there and he looks around, he sees that embrace, like Massey Hall, sees that embrace of audience, they just go, oh my gosh. So it really is, these are spaces that build community, and this has changed the community of music in the city of Toronto, and has been much admired, and I would say it's taught a lot of other architects about what a concert hall could be. And it was the first concert hall that our office had done, so wow.
It's such a
wonderful
beautiful
renovation.
way that you described it, like an embrace, because when you do walk in, it just feels like,
Yeah.
someone's hugging you. Elita, I wanted to come to you next. This is for a design for Algoma University. It's still in the design phase. Can you tell us what we're looking at here, please?
So Carol's firm, Oriama and Tashima and Smoke Architecture, my firm, are partnering on this, and we're working with a fantastic landscape architecture team as well, because the idea is that the land and the building are coming together. It rises gently out of the earth because the inspiration for the building is Makwa, who is a bear, a healer protector, a carrier of medicine, and as the bear moves northward, its hindquarters very gently rises from the ground, and then once you're up on Makwa's shoulders, you can see the water of the lake close to Algoma University. Water is that element of creation where we all originate, and you also get a little higher than Shingwak Hall, which is the former residential school that this is adjacent to.
What would you say is the feeling that we should feel as we approach that?
The overall narrative of the building is the interweaving of the changing priorities of past, present, and future, which are represented by a sweetgrass braid. So that sort of sinuous shape of the building is moving us to a point of truth-telling, what has happened on this site. And the children of Shingwak, who are the survivors of that residential school, were a big part of the design process. The aspirations for the future, which is reconnecting to the forest, which is on the east side of the site, through an outdoor classroom and a permeable eastward facade so that you can move easily from the learning spaces indoors to learning spaces outdoors so that our elders can convey knowledge in the way that we're most comfortable from our greatest teacher, which is the land. And then the needs of the present, which is represented by the building itself, which is organized around a central circle, gathering circle in the middle, where we have Makwa, that protector spirit, sort of situated, where we have the Tikanagan lacings representing, the Tikanagan is a cradle board used by Anishinaabeg Nation, along with quite a few other nations. And the Tikanagan has this sort of lacing pattern. So that's expressed in the woodwork, the heavy timber structure.
I have actually another picture of the interior. I wanted to talk about the light, the materials, the curve, the scale.
Yeah.
How are they all working together in this space?
So we wanted to make sure that we acknowledged the presence of Shingwak Hall with its sort of intimidating big shoulders and, the big stairs up, and very much intended to intimidate young people, children coming into the space. But we wanted to mitigate that by creating this beautiful, naturally planted courtyard garden that this glass looks onto. So you can sort of catch a glimpse of Shingwak Hall, but it's through all our plant and animal relatives that are, on our side. And of course, that door leading to Shingwak Hall also is protected by Makwa. So that's why you see a bear there. And that Tikanagan represents the love and care with which we hold our children, who are the center of the circle. And so this is the circular gathering space around which all of the classrooms and all of the learning spaces are oriented. It honors the 4 cardinal direction doorways, which each have their own teachings associated with them. And the northmost one, which is actually behind the view of this camera angle, leads to Crying Rock, which is a space, the one space in the former residential school where children could come and speak their own language and speak with their siblings, which was also forbidden. So around that rock, they would remember home, they would find a place of strength, and that Crying Rock is now surrounded by landscape and honored by a northward door.
Well, in our last few minutes, I wanted to talk about light because we've been talking about that throughout, and it's obvious throughout all of your projects. And Dawn, you once mentioned in a talk about the benefits of having south-facing windows in hospitals to promote healing. Could you explain that to us, please?
Well, our bodies respond physically to light, natural light, and views of landscape. I mean, there's clear research indicates that bodies heal more quickly in hospital rooms with the right orientation to landscape and to view. And so it just illustrates the principle of that we are. Our chemistry and our physiology as humans is very responsive to the natural environment, and it affects our health and well-being. And so understanding the value of light, the value of orientation, how we bring in light from above, how we create views to the landscape, how we shape space around natural light is fundamentally important.
Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think that we spend so much time on our screens and on our phones, and these sources of light have actually impacted us very negatively. They've changed our sleep patterns. Our constant exposure to sources of light at times that are not related to the circadian rhythms of the day have really changed us fundamentally, and I think it's been negative. And so I think that reattaching ourselves to the natural world is something we have to do. We have to see ourselves as a part of nature, not separate from it. Mm-hmm. And I think that with that comes a sense of respect and responsibility as well. So daylighting our buildings is part of that, making sure that we have natural light, and I loved your point earlier, Marianne, about orientation, understanding where you are and having that ability. So, and glass is part of that story, and glass is part of the story of letting all the daylight in as well as understanding how we can then connect to the places we are in.
I think you have to talk about in praise of shadow as well. We now are a passive house. We're reducing the percentage of glazing to the solid portion of a wall, 70-30, 40-60, which means that it's quite different. So I think how light comes in smaller volumes or smaller really volumes of light, and what you get shadow when you get shadow, and how it helps define spaces as well. And I'd also like to speak in praise of north light too. I think the light that is on a building across from you that comes when you're oriented to north, that the light comes in and reflected or lights a green space is also. So I think it's more than just the south healing light. It's light in all its capacities, and it is that principle of letting in a little bit of light and then almost the Luxo lamp that brings light down. So I think we're changing our attitudes toward all glass buildings and trying to think much more strategically on how light and its patterns and its biophilic attributes can actually create different sort of textures, and it's not just a plain old big glass, we're going to let in as much light as we can. It's a more subtle, nuanced, modulated and shaping with light. And I think that's, we'll see much more of that because we're under a different orientation in terms of how we deal with climate change, and it relates to that.
Well, we're going to leave this conversation here. That's all the time we have. It was really special to hear from all of you about the projects that you are working on and the thought that went behind those decisions that you made. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about some of the challenges that your industry is facing, and also controversial. Like, I didn't know that the Eiffel Tower was once controversial. What? We'll talk about that tomorrow. Thanks again.
You bet.
Thank you.
Our guests all this week are
Eladia Smoke Geishigaba-Week, Principal Architect of Smoke Architecture. Carol Phillips, Design Leader and Partner at Moriyama Tashima Architects. Marianne McKenna, Founding Partner of KPMB Architects. And Dawn Schmidt, Principal of Diamond Schmidt Architects.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.